All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is September 29th, 2021, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm speaking via phone with Dan Poole, who is in Sabrine, Florida, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So, just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born in Illinois. I was the oldest of 6 children that my parents had, and I was actually raised there till I was 18. But during the war, the big war, I guess, we lived in Indianapolis, where my father worked building engines for aircraft that were in the war operation.
Oh, wow. And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Lee Donald Poole. He went by Don Poole, and my mother's name was Pauline Stanley Poole.
Interesting.
Her maiden name was Stanley.
Yeah. And let's see. Did you have any siblings growing up?
I had 5 siblings, all of them younger, and most of them don't remember anything about Indianapolis and living there because it was too early in life for them. But the others were all born in, I had one born in Indianapolis, and then the others all born in Illinois.
Okay, yeah. How would you describe your childhood?
My childhood?
Yes.
My childhood was fairly good. I lived in a little town in southern Illinois, which was nice because we knew most of the people in town. There were 8,000 people or so in the town, and probably another 8,000 in the county. But we lived close enough to town that we could do most of the things that other kids could do, but we had a lot more freedom than sometimes people have in the cities. Our parents knew that if we were doing anything wrong, there'd be other people calling them and telling them.
Yeah.
So we had a pretty good life, and I went to grade school and what they call middle school now, and to high school there. And then after that, I left and came to Indiana.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. Would you say your parents were the most influential people in your childhood?
Absolutely. My dad was a person who believed that your word was your bond, and you didn't have to sign everything. Your word was good enough, and a handshake was the sealing thing. And so you treated people like you wanted to be treated, and he stood for it. I made a derogatory statement about somebody one time, and I was riding in the car with him, and he corrected me immediately and said, "You don't say nasty things about people. They're doing the best they can, and you go along with that." So he was very much that way. And my mother, of course, was a hard worker, raising a family and cooking meals and all that for all of us. So it was a good life we had at the time there. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good situation then.
It was for us, and it was for most people there. I don't know anybody that really had a hard time, but we had a good time and mixed with all the people in the town. I mean, you mix with everybody.
Yeah, sure. What understanding did you have about your family's political beliefs as a kid?
Well, I really didn't know. I knew that my grandfather, my mother's dad, was a staunch Democrat.
Okay.
And so I absolutely adored the man. So I was felt like then that's what we ought to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't even know much about the other party, the Republican Party, and Adlai Stevenson was the governor at the time. That's when he ran for president on the Democrat side. So I was able to see at the last of the Eisenhower-Nixon ticket back in the early 50s. I was we got out of school and just walked down through town to a railroad track that has been there for I don't know how long, and it's still there. But Nixon stopped and did what they call whistle stops, and stopped on the back of the train and talked to the people in the town. I saw one of those firsthand, and it wasn't until I left there that I even considered much about politics, so I started looking at it later in life in a more serious way than to actually see what I did believe.
Right. Sure, okay. And when you were in school, did you have any favorite subjects or anything?
Well, yes. My favorite subjects were the math and science things. I enjoyed those and stayed mainly in that area of school. This is in high school. And then my dad was in business in the little town. It's Olney, Illinois. It's west of Vincennes, Indiana, about 30 miles. And we went to school and did everything there, but I'm not sure where we're headed here right now with all of this. But it was later than that things started happening, and what I left Illinois for was to go to school in Indiana, in Terre Haute.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I went to school.
Yeah, and so what college did you go to?
I started out at what's called Rose-Hulman today.
Okay.
It was Rose Polytechnic Institute at that time, but it's Rose-Hulman. And then I left there and I went to Indiana State, which is in downtown Terre Haute. So I went to Indiana State and graduated from there in business. So I switched over from this math and science to the business things, which were like my father did.
Yeah, okay, sure. And what did you hope to do with your business degree after you graduated?
Well, I hope to go into employment with one of the businesses in the world. I didn't quite do it in the way that I thought I would, but it turned out fine. My first job was with a company called General Adjustment Bureau, which was an insurance adjusting company that was owned by stock insurance companies. And my first assignment was in Kokomo, Indiana, so I knew some people there. We were there for a short time, not very long.
Yeah.
And then they transferred me to Crawfordsville to work in that branch of their office. And that's how I ended up in Crawfordsville, was with that company.
Oh, okay, sure. And let's see, thinking again about your college experiences, how did you view your college experience?
Oh, college was fun. It was a fun time. It was a tough time switching schools. I didn't like that too much, but
yeah.
It worked out. We got it straightened out, and it was a nice time. It was a nice change in life from being a child under your parents' supervision to going out on your own and doing your things. And I met my wife there, and we married shortly after that, and started raising a family. And then after that, the things, don't out down the road, 30 years, well, things got a little different, and we decided to go different ways and got divorced. But
Okay.
it was a fun time, and we had a good time raising our family also. So
Yeah.
it was good.
Sure. And how many children did you have?
Well, I ended up with 2 children, and
Okay.
then I married a lady whose husband was gone, and I adopted 3 more children of hers. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I ended up with 5 children, and it was a good time.
Yeah.
So
Sure. And so when did you start becoming more seriously involved in politics?
I became more seriously involved when I left my first job, and my father had changed to a business of a kind of a general hardware store, a discount store, we called them, and I asked him if he had asked me a lot of times if I would do that in Crawfordsville, and
Yeah.
I turned him down. He had been a car dealer when I was being raised. It was a tough road to hoe because he was a Studebaker dealer, so you're going way back now.
Yeah.
And so I asked him if he was still interested in that, and he said yes, he was. So I started by building a store on the south side of Crawfordsville, and that's when I became more interested in the political things because they affected me more
Yeah.
in getting permits and all of the things that were necessary to operate a business.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And what would you say shaped your political outlook then, once you got interested in politics?
What shaped it?
Yeah.
How I started thinking about how I believed in things, and I was a much more conservative person than I was, let's say, a liberal, and I fit more into the Republican philosophies and things. So I realized then that what I had raised with was just more of a family thing, and I did it more because I liked the people involved of being in my family, but at the same time I found out that I was more interested in the other side and became a Republican.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so once you started to get involved in politics more, did you start thinking about any key issues or legislation that you were interested in?
No, my first venture into politics was to give our congressman some money and to give a friend of mine who was running for the city council some money.
Okay.
And they were both running in an election in the late 70s, and that my friend that was running for city council won by 3 votes, but the next day he came out and he said, "I want you to take my seat." He had found out that he had cancer.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, well, you go take it and run with it as long as you want, and then I'll do that after you're finished. Well, he resigned the next day.
Wow.
So it was over, and so I was put in as a city councilman, and I served there for a couple of years, and then the legislative position, we figured it was going to be open. He had not announced that he wasn't going to run, but I figured it was going to be open, so I put together some people to help do that, to run a campaign committee, and we ran for the legislature. And my main concern at the time for running was business interests, the taxes and requirements that we had on businesses. I was interested in seeing that they stayed in a more conservative nature, and we could keep them that way if I had any say in them at all. And as it turned out, that's what it was. My committee assignments when I went in, the Speaker of the House was a man by the name of Bob Daley from over around Ball State area, Muncie, and he made committee assignments, and one of my committee assignments, because I was in business, was the Commerce Committee. And my previous experience as an insurance adjuster put me on the Insurance Committee. So those were the places that I started, and one of the people that was there, and still, unless it's recently gone, was still working for the state, as he was an attorney with the legislative branch over there, and
okay.
he's still head of the, I don't even know what they call it. It's where we file all of our reports for monies we raised and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some still around from those days in the 80s.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Well, I was 40 years old at the time.
Yeah, sure. So, when you were involved in politics and stuff, did you have any like national political heroes or any state political figures that you looked up to at all, or? Reagan, okay.
President Reagan was a person that I admired for what he had done and for what he kept doing and what he said he was going to do, and then he did it. He to me, kept his word on things, and I was very much impressed by Reagan.
Yeah.
So that one, yes. And I went in right after Reagan came to the legislature the next year.
Okay.
I was elected to the legislature in 1982. And I don't know if you want to go to that yet or not, but that's where when I was elected there.
Yeah. So we're gonna get into that here in a minute, I think. And so when you were running your campaign for the General Assembly, was there a particular thing you tried to emphasize to voters?
There were people had run polls and all kinds of things, and one of the things that people were interested in was education. And it seems like it's always education. It keeps coming up.
Yeah.
But I also ran as a business person who could bring that side of things to the legislature, and not something in some other field that didn't have any business experience to it. And so that's what I did, and we didn't go into very much because the committee kind of made a lot of decisions. I did a lot of the studying, but committee came up with the final things that we did, and part of that was not to get too many issues on the table. About 3 issues is about all we wanted to ever bring to the table. So we would do that, and we would also do that in the way we would present at debates and that sort of thing. We would set our agenda and what we were going to do in a debate, and that we'd stick with that.
Yeah.
Or at least I would stick with it. The rest of them, sometimes they wanted me to say some other things, but I stayed with our agenda that the committee had put together.
Yeah, okay.
So we did that.
Do you remember your opponent that you ran against?
Yes, I remember about all of them. The first opponent that I had, a guy by the name of Don Lash had the seat ahead of me, and people had pushed me to run, and Don Lash is the one we thought was not going to run.
Yeah.
And his son moved back down to that district. Don Lash lived in Rockville. Pretty good family, pretty good bunch of people, nice people. But his son came to Crawfordsville because Crawfordsville was a bigger market for the whole district.
Yeah, okay.
And he ran. In fact, Don Lash resigned, and Russell Lash, his son, came out and had all these campaign stuff put together. I mean, he already had it printed and everything was ready to go. So it was a set deal that it was going to be that way.
Yeah.
So that was my first opponent, and he was my toughest opponent of all time. He was in the primary, not in the general election. It was in the primary.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And do you remember what was most important to you as a candidate when you started running?
The most important thing to me was to be honest and be fair.
Yeah, okay.
With everybody. And it made no difference to me if you were a Republican or Democrat. I was running as a Republican, but some of my best friends were Democrats, and I never took any offense at that. That was never a big deal to me.
Yeah.
My next opponent after that election, that whole election, was a very good friend of mine who was a Democrat, and I knew it, and he decided he wanted to run. He thought I was my first term, and I might be vulnerable, and he could win the election because the district was primarily Republican. It had been set up that way by Don Lash when he was in the legislature.
Sure.
And I don't know how much he had to do with that, but like Montgomery County is a county that I was from. It's very much Republican, and so with that a situation where this person that was a good friend and ran thought he had a chance to do that, and we were still friends. When it was all over, we were still friends.
Yeah.
But he was not successful.
Okay. Sure. What did you think about the election process? Did it seem like a pretty good process, or were there things that you didn't like about it, or?
Oh, I I don't think there was much I didn't like about it. It was a process at that time where money wasn't going to do near as much as shoe leather.
Okay.
And we did a lot of shoe leather. We organized things to go into little towns and make sure that we were there, and we talked to the people. We went door to door and did that sort of thing. That's interesting to do.
Yeah.
Go door to door, you get everything.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Do you have any interesting stories from people you met going door to door?
I'll tell you one that happened the day after I was elected in the primary.
Okay.
A lady, I was walking downtown in Crawfordsville, and a lady crossing the street stopped me. I did not know who she was, and she ringed me out for something that had happened in the government, and she was mad about it. And I said, "Man, you don't have anything to do with that. I never did any of this." And that was my wake-up call, that this is a place where people get things done, and that things happen that they don't like sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was that way. I also met a lady who was elderly at the time, going door to door. And I talked with her, and she wanted me to come in, and we talked about things. And I said, are you going to vote? And she said, no, I don't vote. Said, my daddy didn't think that women ought to vote, so I don't vote, and I'm not going to. And so she wasn't going to vote at all. And
wow.
But it's okay. She still talked to other people who might vote. So
yeah.
I talked with her. I went ahead with things with her, but I was a little shocked because her daddy told her not to, and that was it.
Yeah, I guess you learned a lot about I guess the people you could be representing, and by doing the door-to-door campaigning.
Oh, yes, you do learn a lot about people, and you cross paths with a lot of people going door to door, because other people are doing the same thing, maybe not running for the same office you are, but for running for some office.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, and especially when I got into other counties. Montgomery County was different than Park County, very much different, and those were the two main counties that I represented, and it was a time you had to make sure where you were and what you were talking about, because people had different feelings about things. And
yeah.
Park County is a county that has very little industry in it, and so property taxes are a little more higher, maybe I should say, and they were more interested in how much of their money they were paying for schools. Montgomery County had more industry, and people weren't so much interested or upset about how much they're paying. They wanted good quality schools, and they were more interested in talking about those things than the cost of the schools. One place was one way and one place was the other, and you had to know what you were doing, or you're not going to make people mad, but you're going to talk about things they're not interested in.
Yeah.
So you had to make sure you were talking about the things they wanted to know about. So it was okay. It was fine. I learned a great deal.
Yeah, sounds like it. And did your campaign strategies change over time, or did you continue to do what worked for you the first time?
I continued to do what I did the first time. I never did change from going to events in my district. If Park County schools were having some event, I would be there. I would go to it. And if Montgomery County schools were having some event, I would go there and make sure that I was there, not so much to campaign as to listen to people. Here, I would talk with people at those places. By the time I got finished with this, most people knew who I was. So if they wanted to talk about something, I was there, and I talked to them about different things. And there were things that were done that came out of those talks with people and things like that. So it's very worthwhile.
Yeah, that sounds like it. What was your first election day like? How were you feeling?
First election day?
Yeah, were you first?
I was very uptight about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know how that election was going to turn out. Park County had always taken their candidate and put a lot of votes to their candidate, and Russell Lash came from that county.
Okay.
He was, and this is a primary, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I didn't really know. I had not run in a county-wide election, so I didn't know how people were going to take me in the election, even in my own county. So I was uptight about it. What happened was that instead of losing Park County by 1,000 or 2,000 votes, I wouldn't get 2,000, but you might lose 1,000. I lost Park County by 79 votes.
Okay, wow.
Which meant that we split it.
Yeah.
And then I won Montgomery County, where I had lived for a good while at that time.
Yeah, okay. And so how did you feel when you found out that you officially won the election?
Oh, elated.
Yeah.
Just elated. It was tough. And actually, because the district is so Republican to start with, or it was at that time, and I think it still is, I knew that unless I did something really bad, I would probably win in the fall.
Yeah.
So the big election was that primary election, and I was elated about that, and the committee was elated. We had put together a program, and it had been accepted, and we were successful in it, and we were happy with that.
Yeah, okay. So what were you thinking then the first day you went to the State House as an elected official?
I didn't even know what that first day would be.
Yeah.
When you go to the State House, the first day is organizational day, which is 2 weeks after the election. At least it was at that time, and I think it probably still is. I don't really know. But you'd go there, and you would elect a speaker. If you were in the majority, you'd elect a speaker. If you weren't in the majority, you'd elect a head of your party.
Yeah.
In my case, we elected a speaker who was already the speaker, so we just re-elected Bob Daly for Muncie. And let's see, we elected the caucus chairman also.
Yeah, okay.
And then the speaker appointed other offices, of which I did not get appointed to.
Okay.
I was a newbie. I wasn't going to get appointed to any of that.
Right.
But it was interesting, that organizational day, and the sessions generally start in January. At that particular time, the governor was Bob Orr, and they were in trouble, financial trouble. the state was. And Bob Orr called a special session for the legislature to address the financial conditions we were in.
Yeah, okay.
And then that session was in January. Or not January, in December. Middle of December. We went over there for a couple days, and we raised some taxes. So my first vote was to raise taxes, which is just unreal because that's the very thing you don't want to do.
Right.
But that's what it was, and it had to be done, or the state was going to be in dire straits really quick. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
I met some very good people real quick there, telling me what was going to happen and how it was going to be worked and everything like that. But other people did too. I mean, there were several of us elected at that time, and we were told what to expect and what was going to happen, and it did happen. We did just fine.
Yeah. So, what did you think about the legislative process? Did you think it was really complex, or did it make sense, or was it flawed?
I really thought the legislative process was very good.
Yeah.
And, of course, I was in the majority, so that made it better. I had no particular agenda. I had no legislation that I wanted to pass or anything. I can't even tell you what legislation I had, but they'll make sure you have a bill or two that you can put through, something that isn't real earth-shaking.
Right.
And you can put those through, and you get experience. And I wanted to spend the first year or two learning more than anything else. I wanted to learn what we did and how we did it and why we did it. And that's what I was going through. I didn't really care about the legislation I had at the time. And they put me on the Commerce Committee, which had all of the legislation. I don't know how old you are, Ben, but at the time we were trying to help the economy in Indiana.
Okay.
And the auto industry had gone way down. The lieutenant governor was John Mutz at the time. And
right.
John had put together several programs to help companies come to Indiana. Some of those programs were exactly like other states' programs, but some of them were new also. And they all came through the Commerce Committee. So John Mutz came there and talked on these bills that he had in the legislature to do certain things. And I got a real awakening real fast on what was happening in that committee and what was happening in the legislature, because we were all pushing towards getting this economy in our state going and being in good shape. So I enjoyed the legislative process, and later on I changed some of the committees I was on, but and then for a while I wasn't on any committees.
Yeah.
I had another job there.
Okay. Interesting. And did you have any political mentors in the Indiana General Assembly?
Any political what?
Mentors, people that helped kind of guide you through the process?
Yes, I did. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Bob Daley was one, who was the Speaker of the House. This was a time also when there was a ban on gambling in our state. they were trying to get through, the people who were trying were horse people, actually. They were trying to get through legislation allowing the lottery.
Okay.
And the Speaker of the House was Bob Daley, and I was on the committee where it was going to be heard. And I voted against it at the time, and Bob Daley was against it very much so. So he was right there. But my main mentor in the whole thing was a guy by the name of Jeff Espich, and you may know Jeff. He's also one of the ex-legislators.
Yes, I've heard of him, yeah.
Jeff is an outstanding legislator. He does a great job, and he was the guy who showed me kind of the ropes on what was being done and how it was being done. And he helped me along an awful lot with what was going on there. He was in on the leadership stuff also, so that didn't hurt anything either, to be associated with some of those people.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like good connections to have.
Yeah, well, it is.
Do you remember the first bill that you sponsored?
No.
No. Okay.
I don't. It was something just to follow through the legislative process. That's all it really was. And it forced you to get up on the floor and speak. It forced you to speak in committees. And then, of course, you were on committees, so you had to be there and listen to people speak to committees also. That's what the bill was for more than anything else, and I don't remember what it was. I have no idea. I can remember some other bills, but not that one.
Yeah, no, I understand. What was the regular interactions like between different members of the General Assembly?
The interaction was extremely good within your own party.
Okay.
The interaction between the opposite parties was not too bad, actually. I had friends on that side of the aisle, and I talked with them a lot. And there were some people who were just hard-nosed one side or the other, and all of that. I didn't believe that either side had all the answers, and I didn't believe that one side was good and one side was bad. I just believed that we had different philosophies on how government should run and what it should do. And I made no bones about the fact that I was very willing to be with people, other people. And it's those friends that you make. And you're talking about the legislative process. But if you're not in the majority, it's very difficult to get stuff passed.
Yeah, okay.
So what you do, not in the majority, is that you have friends on the other side, and they have bills that they can get through.
Yeah.
So you get little things that you need for people back home passed inside one of those bills. It's put into another bill of the same nature, and you can get things done. Some of the things that I passed were just for my own district. I mean, that's all that it really went to. So they weren't statewide bills. They didn't have a statewide impact. They only had an impact, a small impact in our area.
Sure.
So they weren't big bills to do anything with, but those bills were always open for people that had things other local things in their districts that were coming. One of those, I'll give an example, was in Lafayette, in Tippecanoe County. I had a bill that would make one township into a town. And the reason it was done is because Eli Lilly had a plant there, and they did not want to be annexed into Lafayette or West Lafayette, so they wanted it that way.
Yeah.
I passed that bill. I did not have a bill to do that. A guy from Shelbyville had the Cities and Towns Committee, and I asked him how to do it, and he got it done for me. And he put in some language that after this was done, this bill went to pot. I mean, it died. It was taken off the books. I think it had a 3-year life to it, and he fixed it and got it. He knew how to do it. I wasn't sure how to go and do that sort of thing for them, but that's what they wanted. Other people in Lafayette could have put other things into that.
Yeah, okay, sure. What about the differences between the House and Senate?
I'll tell you that there was probably a little more animosity at times between the two.
Okay.
Even in your own party.
Yeah.
Some senators had the feeling that they were a little more special than House members.
Right.
And they didn't like to work with you too much.
Okay.
Others did. Others were extremely nice, and there weren't very many like the first group that wouldn't do anything, but we got along pretty well, and we had meetings. I mentioned earlier that Bob Orr was governor, and before he went out of office, I had gone to the leadership part of our General Assembly, and House and Senate leadership all met I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, but I believe it was Thursday. We met with the governor at noon and went over legislation, what was going to happen, and that sort of thing, and what they wanted to happen, what the House was doing, what the Senate was doing. Those meetings were very helpful to know how the House and Senate were working together to get things done that the main legislative body, the governor and lieutenant governor, needed to have to do their job. So they were good things to go to. It was very good, very good.
Yeah, okay. And so when you were trying to get support for legislation, did you feel like it wasn't too complicated to find people that would support you on different bills, or?
No, it wasn't too hard. Usually the only way that you lost support for your legislation was the fact that it was controversial. That would lose you more people than anything, even your own people. They just didn't like some of that stuff.
Yeah.
When we get to some legislation, we'll talk about a couple of those things that did happen and what took place.
Sure, okay. And how much of sort of creating legislation was conducted outside of votes and committee hearings, but rather just like sort of private talks and stuff?
How much was created outside?
Yeah, like how much legislation, how much of like the legislative talks that you would have in the General Assembly were basically held in an informal setting versus the formal setting of like committee meetings and stuff?
Well, legislation came from two sources, mainly. One source came from summer study committees.
Okay.
And legislation would just come out of those that people, the chairman of the committee or whatever would take care of it and have legislation drafted. The other source came from the legislators themselves and what they saw in their own districts and what they observed was happening in our communities. And that source was, it wasn't drafted by the legislators. Everything was drafted by legislative assistants that we had and a whole group of attorneys that were there to draft that stuff and make sure it was interfaced properly with all the various places that they would go to. Those were the most interesting.
Okay. Yeah. And when people were voting on legislation, did you have a pretty good idea of how people would vote before they actually were going to vote?
Well, you had a pretty good idea of how they were going to vote. I would say that 90% of the legislation passed, no matter if the Republicans or the Democrats are in charge. It just goes through. It's 90 to 8.
Okay.
You know, it just flops through. The ones that you got controversy on, you were counting votes in. You were lining up. You're taking a list of legislators, and this one's for, and this one's against, and this one's undecided, and you'd go through the whole list and do that, and you'd go talk to them.
Yeah.
And you'd see how they were going to vote. Yes. And part of my job at one time in the leadership thing was to get people to vote for legislation that was needed to be passed. Mostly it was legislation that the administration wanted, the governor and lieutenant governor.
Yeah, okay.
But most of that wasn't bad stuff anyway, so it just went through. Once it was discussed and altered and changed around the way it fit everybody, then it was okay.
Right. No, that makes sense. How influential would you say party leadership was when it came to getting legislation passed?
Party leadership was influential in a couple of different ways. One thing, people respected you and your opinions if there was something they didn't know about. But party leadership also could be a negative thing. If you didn't support some of that stuff, then the leadership wasn't going to support all of your stuff.
Yeah.
And that worked primarily on one side of things. It wasn't often done, but I've seen it done. I've seen it done for different reasons, and just was just tell them something. So rarely was it out of line to what was done and how it was done, but the negative was used once in a while, but not. You need something in the budget. You want the budget or not? You were going to vote for the budget.
Right.
sometimes that would happen, but most of the times it was just a matter of sitting down with people and explaining and listening to their problems, and sometimes working out those problems so that it met their expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it's not bad.
Right.
That's why we have committees up there. You go through and you listen to all that stuff, and
sure.
And you ask questions, and you get answers, and you get change made that's good.
Yeah. How often would you say you had to work with Democrats to get legislation passed?
Oh, not very much.
Okay.
It wasn't very often. I had to work with Democrats more when the Democrats were in charge.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To get stuff passed. But I wasn't a big guy to get up and harangue Democrats because they were Democrats, or even harangue Republicans sometimes. So I just didn't do that.
Yeah.
I thought we were all trying to do the same thing. We may have a little different philosophy on how it should be done, but we're all trying to make things better for the people. And if you start doing things just because you don't like somebody, you're way off base. You're not doing the right thing
sure.
anymore.
Yeah. What were the interactions like between Democrats and Republicans?
Interactions were fine. I would see at going to lunch a lot in the leadership group. We didn't interact with Democrats all that much, but otherwise I would see Republicans and Democrats going to lunch together and visiting with each other and sitting around talking. It was fine.
Yeah.
But there were certain things that Democrats did, and there were certain things that Republicans did, and you just knew they were going to do it. They had to do it.
Right.
It's just the way it was. Unions. Republicans were always had to be opposed, and Democrats were always for. And it didn't make much difference if it made any sense or not. That's just the way it was.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes it didn't make any sense.
So it's just
okay.
Kind of based off of like political philosophies of the parties that you have to be on this side or the other?
Yeah, but that was one thing. Chamber of Commerce, for instance, gave money to both parties, but most of their legislation and the things they wanted came out of the Republican side.
Okay.
But there were Democrats that they were supportive of, and unions same way, although they had one or two.
Yeah.
There was a lady that I suppose is on your list now. Her name was Barb Engel from up around Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
And, Barb was elected the same time I was, and she was elected as a Republican. She was a Republican all the time except when school unions were concerned, and she was for the school union. And we knew it, you accepted it, and just went on. That's the way it was. Now, she switched later. After I was gone, she switched to the other party.
Okay.
I think some people got a little hateful with her or something. There were some new people coming in, and they thought they could do everything. I guess that happens.
Interesting.
That also happens.
Yeah. See, what would you say was the most controversial legislative issue during your time in the General Assembly?
Most controversial things were the budget.
Okay. Yeah.
and money for education. Those were the most controversial things because they were of such massive amounts, and people were trying to do things that, and other people thought there ought to be some other things done, and they're always that way. And those were the most controversial. Now I had some controversial bills that we worked with people very hard to make sure that we could get everybody on board. We didn't get everybody on board, but we got enough that we could pass those.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Do you remember a particular piece of legislation that you had to sort of work on the longest, that kind of took up the most time than other pieces of legislation that you worked on?
Yes. And that's the one that was controversial, and they could not pass it before. I don't know. I can tell you what I did and got them both passed, but it was the living will, and there was a big controversy, religious controversy over the living will, and they tried to pass that several times and could not ever get it passed. There are two pieces of legislation that go with that. There's the living will itself, and there's called a durable power of attorney. And the living will means that you make a decision that when you can't recover, they withhold services and let you die. They don't hook you up to some monitor that keeps your heart beating.
Oh, okay.
You shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. It's when people they're just right before they die.
Right.
And the durable power of attorney means you give the right to make those decisions to another person.
Yeah.
So it's a different piece. I just divided the two. And the living will legislation was the first one we passed, and it was written and rewritten and all kind, and it was done with both Republicans and Democrats. It was not a piece of legislation that was politically controversial. It was philosophically controversial to some of those people.
Okay.
So I worked with religious leaders. The Catholic had a lobby there, and I worked with them a lot, and I worked with the ministerial associations on making sure we didn't allow this to become a euthanasia bill.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked on it for a long time, and we finally got it passed after going over may and shall and all kinds of just single words like that. And if you look at the living will legislation, unless it's been changed, and it was only changed once after it was passed that I knew about, it has a part of it that you can not only have people withdraw services if you're dying, but you can have them added. If you want them to do everything they can to keep you alive, you can do that.
Yeah.
That's a separate part of it. That piece of legislation I went through. I had Republicans and Democrats vote for it, and Republicans and Democrats both voted against it. It just was
a mess.
That's the way it was. And it went to the Senate, and it passed, and we got it out. Got that one out, and then the next year we went to the durable power of attorney. It wasn't nearly as hard. We got it passed also.
Okay.
So those are the two pieces of legislation. And the place that it came from, I was at a basketball game in Crawfordsville, and we were walking across the floor, and the guy says, "Well, we have a living will in our state." And I said, "Oh, no, we'll find out." And that's when it all started right there. It was that one guy walking across the floor at the basketball game. And I knew him.
Yeah.
And he hollered at me, and he asked me that question. So we did it. We got it done the next year.
That's interesting. Okay.
And it passed. But it was a good piece of legislation.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't any more important than some of that commerce legislation that we passed for John Mutz.
Yeah.
I didn't have as much to do with it. I carried some of those bills, but I didn't have much to do with them. Putting them together. Mutz did a great job of doing that as a lieutenant governor, building those things up so we could compete in the world and the business and industry.
Sure. Yeah, okay. What would you say was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome during your time in office?
Leaving.
Leaving, okay. Why is that?
It had been a good time.
Okay.
I enjoyed the work of the legislature, but I didn't believe we ought to be there forever.
Yeah.
Some people have been. My replacement's been there since I left in 1994.
Okay.
He's a good guy. He's a good legislator, but that's Tim Brown. I don't even know if you know Tim Brown or not, but he was Ways and Means chairman, and he's in a motorcycle accident, and I think there's two people that do that job now. I'm not sure what they're doing with it, but we were different in what we did all the way through, and I just thought there was enough. I was there 12 years, and I thought it was enough, and I left, and that was the hardest thing to do, right there.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have friends in places that would help me. My second term, I was made an assistant whip, so to speak. Didn't really do anything, didn't do anything else. But it was a little perk that you got. You were in the second tier of leadership. And I just went on from there, and I finally became caucus chairman. And just stayed in that position for a few years, and then I left the legislature and let somebody else took that job. But it was everything I did was fun, and well, not everything, I guess, but most of it. I met some very, very nice people. Not only legislators, but people who come to see that legislation is done, that are interested in it from back home. They were just good people, a lot of good people.
Yeah.
I had a lady one time who was a good friend. In fact, her whole family was a good friend, but they were Democrats.
Okay.
And I remember a guy got elected as a Republican on the county commissioners. And she told him, she said, "If you need any Democrats for anything, I know all three of them in town. I'll get one for you." She was just a jewel, and she wanted to know, there was some controversy over legislation up in Minnesota, and it was over people getting married, and then all the wealth was divided equally in the marriage, no matter how it came in, no matter anything about it. She wanted to know about this bill, so I said, "I'll get it for you," and I got it, and I gave it to her one day. And she called me the next day and she says, "This is awful." I said, "I've been telling you that's awful all along." She said, "Well, we don't need anything like this." I said, "You don't, and you're not going to get it either, because it was bad." It was what it did with their legislation. And they probably changed it now, but if a guy or a lady wanted to be a jerk, all she or he had to do was to marry somebody, put $10 or $1 into their account, and they had half of that account. It was theirs. No matter how big it was.
Wow.
And they had $1 and somebody else had $1 million in their way. It was theirs, and that was a very controversial part of it, that somebody could scam it, so to speak,
sure,
with the legislation, make it a legal scam, I guess. So, but the whole thing was fun. The whole thing was a good time, and I enjoyed speaking to people. I enjoyed going to schools and talking. We talked mostly to fourth graders, and I had a little program I put together with the flag, and I would get the kids involved with it, and we would go through how the flag was made up and what all the things on the flag meant. And it was a fun time to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So was the city council, for that matter. I was on the city council, and it was too. In fact, I took more flack off the city council than I actually took off the legislature.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, when you're on the city council, you're right there with everybody every day.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
If there's a pothole on the road, they're going to call you about it.
Yeah.
So, but there weren't. There were people who thought that we were being watched every day, but in reality, people didn't do that. They didn't understand. Some of them would come to legislative breakfast, which we would have, and they would learn what the legislation was that was going through. Senators would be there, and House members would be there, and we'd talk about the legislation in general and our own piece of the legislation, what they were trying to do. So,
sure,
it was worthwhile.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, what lessons would you say you learned from your experience in the General Assembly?
Well, I learned how to do a lot of things that I wasn't very good at to start, and it was difficult. One is public speaking, which everybody fears so much, and by the time I left the legislature, there was no fear of that at all.
Yeah.
I learned that there's times you have to compromise. You can't be hard-nosed every day. You're not always right, and you're not always wrong, but you don't want to be hard-nosed where you're unbending, unreliable, and you're just stonewall anybody who's different than you. That's not correct. It's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think it helped me in operating my own business back home. I knew people, and they come in, and you could talk with people. You learned to listen a lot. I mean, we're talking here back and forth with the two of us, and we learned to listen because if you're doing all the talking, there's a whole bunch of knowledge out there you're missing all the time.
Yeah.
And one session before I became part of the full membership thing, I was a chairman of the Commerce Committee, as a matter of fact, and you learn how to conduct meetings. You learn lots of different things that you learn that how people react, how people act. It's just a big learning process. I probably learned more there than I ever did in college.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Do you have any regrets as a legislator?
No,
Nope.
I don't have any regrets at all as a legislator. I do regret what happened to some people when they were in controversial districts, districts that are real even, and they lose their seat, and it's just devastating to them. I feel sorry for some of those people, both sides.
Yeah.
Both sides, Republican and Democrat. They were very, very good people over there. Yeah, there's a few jerks, but there always are, I guess. And you get 100 people together, you're going to have some of that. But for the most part, the people do a really good job of electing their legislators. And I was proud to serve with them, and all of them, Republicans and Democrats, senators and House members.
Yeah.
And the local offices. I'm talking about the Treasurer and Secretary of State and all of those people that are elected to those offices. They're very good people, too.
Yeah. Sure.
So, yes, I regret some of those. I regret leaving those people and missing those people, but it was, in my mind, it was time for me to move on, and somebody with different thoughts and different actions to go up and do their job.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say was your proudest moment as a legislator?
Passing that living will legislation.
Yeah, okay.
It was, I mean, I did some other things, like I told you about getting the township all changed into a town, and I did things for Crawfordsville. Crawfordsville had owned a historic site, and they wanted to turn it back over to the Historical Society. But technically, the way the books are written, they had to put it up for bids if they were going to do that.
Okay.
And they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to put this site up for bids. So I got another piece of legislation like that just allowed them to sell it for $1 to the Historical Society. And that's what they did. And then that one also went away. I learned my lesson. I made it so it died, and it did. It just died. But those things you're proud of, to do the jobs that people want back home, to answer their questions and get them acclimated with the government so that they can get their things done if they have problems with the insurance industry or medical problems or anything else. I had a special way that we handled those, and it was that we don't dump any. You've been dumped, I've been dumped, where people just pass you off to somebody else and forget you.
Yeah.
Well, I told my people that you call back and you make sure that when they went to that person, they got what they needed. And then if they didn't, then go back and start working on it again.
Sure.
And make sure they got taken care of. And I had people that had questions more than once, and they would just call my staff people. I didn't even know it until after they'd already called and something had been done. But they knew who to call to get the thing done. We didn't do all of that stuff. But there were things that legislators could get that other people could not get. They just wouldn't put up with them. But the legislators they put up with, because the legislators also had a little bit of control over their funds and their jobs.
Yeah.
So I did regret leaving those people. I had some very good friends there, and I did regret that. But the way it is.
Sure. Yeah. No.
You do what you believe, and that's what I believe.
Yeah, makes sense.
Should be done.
What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Well, I think it's. I don't know that it's advice you can take. You either are or you aren't. And if you're an honest and fair person to start with, you will do well as a legislator. If you're self-centered and looking out for your interest only, you're not going to do very well. You probably won't even get elected, but if you do, you're not going to do very well working with other people because they're not going to like your philosophy of things. So I don't know that it's advice, but I would tell you, if you're a self-centered person and not worried about what other people have and have to do, you're not going to be very good. It's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing. Honesty is, and that's the way I was raised. My dad was that way. He believed in that, and honesty is the biggest thing going. That's the one thing we have.
Yeah. Sure. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
The most important work of what?
Of the Indiana General Assembly.
Most important work they do is funding. That's the main thing is funding and funding education.
Okay.
Education, both at the local level and higher education,
Yeah.
are all very dependent on the legislature, and they take a large sum of all the money that is spent. So those are the main functions, but the other functions are making sure that people have the ability to live a good life and free of threats all the time from criminals and other things of people that take advantage of them. We need to do the things that our citizens need to make sure they have good lives for themselves and their families.
Yeah, okay. What would you say the public does not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
The public knows very little
Yeah.
about it, actually. Most people that are elected know very little about it. They learn quickly, but they don't know the process of how a bill gets printed, how it gets entered, how it goes through the process of committees and hearings and all that. They have no idea about that. Some of them do because we tell them, but that's a very small number of the people that we ever reach to tell exactly what's happening. I've seen legislators that would get to talking about something someone asked about, like in those breakfasts that we go to while we were in session. and they wouldn't tell anything about the bill. They wouldn't tell anything about what it's going to do. They just tell you about the process. Well, we've got to get this in order so we can get this through committee. And then once it gets through committee, we got to get it through the House. And then after we finally get it there, we got to send it over to the Senate, and they got to get it through the committee. And this blah, 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 all that, saying nothing. People do that. And I guess they think they're telling people something really important, but it's not important at all. They don't tell them what kind of a chance it has. They don't tell them what it even wants to do or what it might do that was bad.
Right, yeah.
Some things are bad, and I'll tell you this, a great deal of the legislation that is going through the General Assembly is nothing but correcting errors we made in previous assemblies.
Wow.
There's a whole bunch of it that just does that. Somebody comes in and they got some legislation that deals with judges, and they want to change something about judges, and next thing you know, you've voted it through, and here come 14 other judges around that we've stepped on along the way. So we have to go back and correct what we've done so that we don't solve the problem for one and create problems for 14 more. So
yeah.
There's a lot of that goes on, and you just have to make sure that it doesn't do that. But we don't get it done all the time.
Sure.
Legislators, I wish were a little more into reading legislation and knowing what it was, and, especially in their own committees, to read those. I served when the Democrats were in charge, and I was on a committee, and I won't mention any names here, but I had a Democrat was in charge of the committee. He was a good friend. And he'd come to me before we go to a meeting. He says, is there anything I need to look out for in these bills that he had on the agenda for that day? And I had read them, and I would tell him if there was anything he needed to look for. Most of the time, there's nothing.
Right.
But once in a while, there was something you need to watch out for, somebody do something or whatever. And we'd talk about it, and he'd be ready for it. So it worked. It worked. It's the regular thing. You got to communicate with people, and you have to trust people. So.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's important things that people should know.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. Last few questions here. How prominent would you say lobbying was in the General Assembly, and what effect did it have?
Lobbying was not what the general public thinks it is.
Okay.
Lobbying, generally from the legislative standpoint, are people that, yes, they bring bills up and they explain those bills and they explain why they need them, and they'll take care of things for you. But if you ask them about things that are not too good in this legislation, or that might hurt somebody else in the legislation, they're very willing to listen to that and to make changes where necessary. Lobbyists are also good resources, and they're really good. If you get a lobbyist that has been there for a while, he's been through the legislative processes, and he knows the law that affects him. And if you need some explanations of some of those things, they can do it, and they can give you a lot of background. So I got along well with lobbyists. I never had any trouble with, I didn't have any trouble with any of them. Some of them were against me. but I didn't have any trouble with them.
Yeah. Okay.
They like union lobbyists. They weren't going to vote for me, and they weren't going to give me any money, and they weren't going to help me, and they're going to give money to my opponent. I know that, and they know that. So what's the big deal?
Yeah.
It works, and I go to them and get information on what they were doing and things, and why certain things were happening. They just want the playing field tilted in their way, and the other people want it tilted their way, and that's what the whole thing's about. They're working on it, and they try to keep it pretty level, and they do. They keep it fairly level.
Yeah, sure. How would you say the state of Indiana has changed over the course of your lifetime?
Things have changed considerably. There's more people. There's more roads. Interstate systems been put in. Industry has left our country. That part I don't like. We have changed a lot of things from what it was. The local downtown stores were those people that built and ran those stores. They were the leaders in our community. They were the people that ran for mayor and ran for the councils, and they're also the people that lead all the service clubs at the Elks and the Kiwanis and the Rotary and all those. Those are the people that did that. Those are gone. Those have gone. The big box stores are the things that have taken over, and I was one of those in that transition. I was a medium box store, and
Yeah.
I look at that and I think I am not sure that's what I should have been doing, but it went on whether I did it or not. It was going to happen, and it did happen. And you can go down through the downtowns of little towns around Indiana, and you'll see storefronts all empty. They're all empty. Not all, but most of them are empty because all the business has gone out to the big box stores. And
Yeah.
there's one in almost every town anymore. At least county seat. So that's the biggest change that's happened. And we don't have those people anymore in our communities that are good at it. The people that have some are usually ones that have a college or university in their town. They've got some very qualified people to do some things in those. We're not going to lose those. But if you don't have that, you're not going to go very far. So they are the leaders, and they are gone. They've closed their stores, or they died in the store, and nobody else would take it, so it closes. We used to have people that come in and they'd open a new men's store or women's store in town, but those are all gone. Our towns have changed in what we have and where our focuses are, and it's just the way it is. And I mean, look at Indianapolis, everything moved out, and it was, I don't know if you remember that or not, but while I was there, we passed legislation, and it was done by the Simons. They were pushing this legislation. They got all those places built downtown Indianapolis. Now it's coming back, and there's more crime down there, and that sort of thing. But for a while, when I was there, we walked all over town. At night, we'd go over to places and then walk home.
Yeah.
And you don't do that anymore.
Right.
We cleaned it up, and then we've let it go back. So those are things that have changed. That I remember the old days, and they were not too bad. But about 1990. 30 years, that's all.
Mm-hmm.
The cell phones are wonderful.
Yeah.
But there weren't any before that, and everybody got along just fine. They just didn't have a phone on them all the time. Those are the kind of things that have changed. There's a lot of things that changed for the good, too. But I don't know. We just have to keep working to make it do what people want it to do. So we'll be all right.
Yeah.
We're going to be okay.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. What about how do you think the Indiana General Assembly and politics in Indiana, how do you think those have changed?
Politics in and of itself is very partisan.
Yeah.
And that partisanship is not always good for things. But by being partisan, both parties are that way, we get things done on both sides of the aisle. We change. Democrats come into power for a while, and then Republicans come into power. There are some things that have gotten out of whack in that process. Little places like Crawfordsville, where I spent my lifetime. They don't change a great deal, but there are some changes there where Republicans don't hold every office.
Yeah.
There are things that Democrats also achieve, and rightfully so, in lots and lots of cases. But in Democrat towns, I'm sure there's, like Terre Haute, which is a solid Democrat, there are Republicans that get elected every once in a while there. So there are some changes, but I'm not sure what's happened to our cities. Our cities are all bankrupt. They're all controlled by the Democrat Party.
Mm-hmm.
There seems, I don't know how we changed that. I don't know how we changed to make these things not bankrupt anymore and not just going under and have to be bailed out by the federal government. I mean, for the last 30 years, we've been looking at places that they can't even pay the benefits that they've got for people who've retired. It's just Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis. Indianapolis is not so bad, but Baltimore, all these towns, these major cities, and we've done things to try to help make them more even keel, but it doesn't seem to have worked too well. The cities, I think, need some work and to get them more open to both sides. Whenever the parties are about even, it really works well.
Yeah.
It does work well. Whenever one has all control, it doesn't work so well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it is, and we need to change some things. But we've always needed to change some things.
Right.
There's always something that needs some work, and whether it's schools or school buildings or what, we need some things. They get into big fights over, we're going to consolidate schools. Boy, that was a big fight for a long time.
Sure.
Now I doubt if we tried to divide them, they'd allow them to be divided. But there's some that would, but it seems to have finally worked itself out. Things work out.
Yeah.
They seem to. And they'll fix the city someday too, but it's going to take a while.
Right. Let's see. What qualities do you think that the people of Indiana still have or hold dear?
The people have? What qualities do the people have?
Yeah, people of Indiana, yeah.
Oh, I think the people in Indiana are all fairly conservative. Even the liberal Democrats are more conservative than you really believe, you think, because if you go look at some of them in some other places, they would be totally out of line with some of that. I think the people are more conservative and are dedicated to working to make things happen. I just think most of the people in our state want to have a better world than when we came in. We all want to do that. We don't all do it, but we want to do it. And I just think the people of Indiana are still hardworking, dedicated individuals that enjoy life and enjoy their families.
Yeah. Let's see. So last question here. What do you think Hoosiers need to do to help make the Indiana General Assembly better?
Oh, I think the thing that would make the Indiana General Assembly operate a little better if it was more open to the people. And we did that. I happened to be there when we put computers in the General Assembly. I was one of the first people to have a computer. I'm talking about laptops that the legislators have. Now everybody's got one. And to get, we were talking about the library and to get stuff put into the library and put it in places where people can access it. They can actually see what's going on in the legislature. Most of them don't care.
Yeah.
But if they want to know, if there's anything that affects them, they can look it up and see. And almost everybody has a computer anymore. In their home, so they can go on the internet. They can do that kind of stuff. Make it more open so that people can see, and so that legislators know they can't just go up there and do willy-nilly and then go home and talk out of the other side of their mouth. We have congressmen that do that. We don't need any more legislators that do that. And just keep it as open as we can for the general public to know what's going on, and that will make everything work better. It just makes it. There's a few people that get paranoid about it, and they won't do anything because they think it's a bad deal. But it's not a bad deal. It's not bad at all to let people know that what you're doing and why you're doing it. And
right.
If you can't explain why you're doing something, you better not be doing it. That's just the way that things are.
Yeah.
But
sure. Well.
So that's what I think could make it better.
Yeah. That's good. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you want to mention, or?
No. I appreciate talking about the legislature. It's been a long time since I was there.
Yeah.
But they are some very dedicated people, and you can be proud of the work that they do for everyone in the state of Indiana. It's a good process. It's one of the best I've seen. It has its problems, but it's still the best I've ever seen. So I appreciate talking with you, and we'll talk again someday, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking part in the project, and I'll be in touch with you more. So.